Hey, what's up, everybody? I want to welcome you to another episode of the Dreamerspro Daily Recap, where we give you a recap of all of the hot topics that we covered that day. You can catch them in their long format and also catch it fully streaming for free on Apple Podcasts. We published a bunch of shows yesterday on some of the allegations surrounding JJ Redick in terms of his use of some racial slurs. We produced a lot of shows and it brought out a range of opinions. Some people were happy that we were touching on it. Other people were like, why are you discussing this? And some people were like kind of in the middle, like, do I believe this? Do I not believe this? Et cetera, et cetera. But as I was going through some of the commentary, I noticed that there was this contingency of people out there that were like, don't talk about this. Don't talk about this. Don't talk about this. And I'm like, why? Why are you guys trying to curtail what I discuss? We discuss a whole bunch of frivolous things. There are no issues with that. So why can't we talk about JJ Redick? Number one. Number two, we've discussed this about other coaches or players that became coaches. So why should JJ Redick be exempt in any way, shape, or form? So in the midst of talking about him, I then began to think of one of the biggest voices on ESPN, which is Malika Andrews. Now, why did I start thinking about Malika Andrews? Well, Malika Andrews has a reputation for targeting men on ESPN, especially black guys. She's fond of just, trashing them on television. And there's been moments where, she made it her business, like quite literally her business, to go out of her way, literally, to go out of her way to dig up dirt on certain coaches or coaches that were going to become players or assistant head coaches that were going to eventually become NBA coaches. And she spared no expense in her investigation. And they all said that she did it. She did it. In the words of, we want to make sure the public has all the information about any particular candidate getting a head coaching job in the NBA. But there was one thing that she did about the current head coach of the Boston Celtics, the NBA champion head coach, Joe Mazzulla, that pissed a lot of people off. And this was this was right after he got promoted to the head coaching position for the Boston Celtics. She went out on ESPN and decided to do a segment where she basically brought up his past and to talk about all of the things that occurred in his past that had nothing to do with his current position right now. So what we want to do is play what Malika Andrews originally had to say about Joe Mazzulla. Take a listen to her here.
Woj, you reported that Joe Mazzulla will be the interim head coach here. You can see his resume on your screen. He's been a Celtics assistant coach the last 3 seasons after spending the previous 3 seasons at Fairmount State. And he played for West Virginia between 2006 and 2011, and now could become the NBA's youngest head coach at 34 years old. And we'd be remiss not to also mention that Mazzulla was arrested twice at West Virginia, once in 2008 for underage drinking and aggravated assault. He pled guilty, paid a fine, and then again in 2009 for domestic battery after an incident at Morgantown Bar. The domestic battery case never went to trial. It was settled in August of 2009. He paid a $100 fine and court costs, plus had to do 40 hours of community service. Now, that was 13 years ago. He settled and paid both fines. So, Woj, why are the Celtics choosing him as their next head coach?
So you heard Malika Andrews. So that's her and Joe Mazzulla, right? So as I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, she did this about Joe Mazzulla. She did it also about Ime Udoka. So I'm like, really? She did? Well, if you guys remember, over a year ago, Malika Andrews and Stephen A. Smith got into this really heated exchange on television when the news initially dropped that the Boston Celtics were going to be suspending Ime Udoka eventually. Well, she was one of the people that was in the press conference. So she came on ESPN First Take to report what took place in the press conference. And in the midst of that, she basically tries to talk to Stephen A. Smith like as if he's some little boy on his own show, and basically saying that this information is pertinent to the audience and we must discuss Ime Udoka and he should be put front and center based on the allegations that came out at that time. So what we want to do is play exactly what Malika Andrews had to say to Stephen A. Smith on his show about Ime Udoka. Take a listen to Malika Andrews here.
Stephen A., with all due respect, this is not about pointing the finger. Stop. What became apparent to me in this press conference is that we do not have all of the information here. And it was frustrating to me that the Celtics declined to elaborate or to give more specifics about what exactly the rule breaking was that led us to this point. So that I just wanted to get that out of the way first. But to answer your question, Molly, I think what stood out to me, I think what stood out to me is that Brad Stevens, he was upset. That's what stood out to me about what he termed rampant Twitter BS is the word that he used, that women were unfairly dragged into this within the Celtics organization. You could see that Brad Stevens was visibly upset about this. And I also found that to be gross and unnecessary, that folks were bringing in the names and the images of women that is just not a fact. That was purely speculation. And so to me, that is what stood out. But the Celtics as an organization could have done more, and short of doing more ahead of this yesterday, they could have owned that responsibility in this press conference. I understand that there were legal parameters that they had to operate within for everybody involved, and I appreciate the fact that they brought in outside counsel and did a thorough organization. And I think that that is something that was clearly necessary in this situation. But the fact that it was able to go on all day, the fact that we are sitting here debating whether somebody else should have been suspended or not, we are not here, Stephen A., to further blame women. That is not why we are here.
So you heard Malika Andrews there talking to Stephen A. Smith about Ime Udoka. You heard how passionate she was about it. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, where's Malika Andrews on these JJ Redick allegations? Where is she? Now, some of you may say, well, the reason she's not saying anything about JJ Redick because none of this has been 100% confirmed. Was anything 100% confirmed with Ime Udoka? Did we have all the information? As a matter of fact, when the news dropped, we didn't even know the staff member he was involved with. And when Stephen A. Smith tried to bring it up, she then slapped his hand down and said, how dare you try to make this about women? So she didn't need all the information to go out there and give that information to the public. My question is why aren't we hearing from her discuss this? Number one. Number two, in the vetting process of JJ Redick, why didn't we hear or see any segment from Malika Andrews talking about, hey, do you know back in college, JJ Redick was accused of using racial slurs against black women? Did you hear he was using some slurs against Asian, NBA fans? I never heard any of this investigative reporting from Malika Andrews. None of it. And my thing is, let's keep it fair and balanced. Let's keep it fair and balanced across the board. I want to react to some comments that some people made yesterday quickly. I got the reoccurring comment that, oh, you're making this about race. To the people that share that sentiment, I have to ask you the question. When you say I'm making it about race, what exactly do you mean? Because it seems like the person that made it about race here is JJ Redick. All I'm doing is reporting on it. Some events occurred that included some racial slurs, and I'm reporting on it. So how am I making it about race? Number one. Number two, if something is about race, you shouldn't say it's about race. Why? Why? Some people will say, well, this is a form of division. You should have spent that time emailing and messaging JJ Redick when he said those things allegedly. I never said it. The person who said it is the one that's guilty, not me. Not me. And finally, look, I'm going to go there because we're planning to open up another channel towards the end of the year. We're going to be discussing larger societal issues, and we're going to talk about politics a little. This is something that for those of you who follow the channel, know that I've steered clear politics because I hate it. But there are some things that are occurring in society that I do have some viewpoints on. And I'm getting tired of when I try to touch on these things from time to time on this channel here, the sports channel, we're being told you can't say this here, you can't say that. So I was like, okay, fine. It's a sports channel. People come here for sports. I understand. Let's create another platform where we can discuss that. And if people are interested in it, they can migrate over there. I understand it. We're going to keep this 100% sports. Then we can discuss other things there 100%. And I can understand people that want that. And I totally get that. But I just want to quickly say this one thing. Some of you watching the show may say, well, we've been wondering, Charles, what do you consider yourself to be? Are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? Are you a conservative? Are you a liberal? Are you an independent? Where do you stand? Here's where I stand. When I was a little bit younger, let me say in my 20s, I could have viewed myself somewhat as a liberal. When I left the United States back in 2011, the United States was a totally different place from a cultural standpoint. Throughout my time out of the United States, I've seen that if things have changed in a way that I can't understand. And in certain times, I can't even recognize the United States. I'm like, what has happened? What has happened? And as time has gone on, I've shifted towards the center. Then I became a parent. And once I became a parent, it no longer became about me and what I think. I also have to think about what's best for my child. And therefore, I went to the center and I went a little bit towards the right. A little bit, so I would say center, leaning a little bit towards the right. But that doesn't mean that I cannot examine issues on the left and the right and judge them dispassionately. As I said before, and I'm going to say it again, I agree with some things that people say on the right. I agree with some things that people say on the left. It's called being fair and having an open mind. I agree with both people. I don't get into the insults, oh, liberals are this or conservatives. There are plenty of people out there to do it, and there are plenty of people that love that. I personally believe that really does nothing. I think what that does is it creates a wedge between people where it just further demarcates people and says, okay, you guys over here, we're over here, and we're just going to be throwing stones at each other across the fence. In the case of this, I just want to address this. If it means that if you're a conservative, for example, then you should not be able to address these issues, then you can't match me. You cannot include me in that group, because there's certain conservative views that I have, there's certain liberal views that I have. Overall, as a parent, I'm leaning a little bit more to the right, but that doesn't stop me from discussing these things. I'm not running away from these issues. We're all adults here. And if I feel a particular way about an issue, I'm going to talk about it. Whether it makes some people comfortable or not, I'm going to discuss it. And in the case here, I'm pointing out an incongruity that exists in the coverage of Malika Andrews, because she's the first one to jump up and start bringing up the history of Ime Udoka, Joe Mazzulla. All of these guys were coaching candidates. In the case of JJ Redick, we can't find her. And I'm saying that we need to see that same consistency from you, since you have made it a pattern of behavior. That's why I stand on the issue. That's the reason why I'm discussing it. The NBA draft came on where I am around 1 a.m. in the morning. So I'm like, okay, I had never watched it before. So what I thought it was going to be was Adam Silver was going to come out there, call people back and forth, like 1, 2, 3. I didn't know that he'll say, okay, the Atlanta Hawks, you have 5 minutes to make your decision. They call up a person and they go through all of the hugs and kisses and crying, and you go up there and you shake hands. Then they talk about, and then number 2, and I'm like, whoa, this thing is taking forever. Now, why was I interested in this particular draft? I think I was interested for the reason a lot of people are interested. I was interested to see what number Bronny James, the first son of LeBron James, was going to be picked in this NBA draft. And we've heard a bunch of things. Some people thought he was going to be the first pick by the Lakers at number 17. Some people thought he was going to be the pick at 55, right? So I stayed up to watch, and I watched, and I watched, and I watched, and I watched, and then I saw the Lakers, their pick at 17. I forgot the player that selected, but they ended up not selecting Bronny James. And I think I saw the 18th pick, and I'm like, man, I'm going to bed. Around that time, it was like 3 a.m. in the morning. Like, I'm going to bed, and I'll catch the rest in the morning. So what happens? I woke up this morning and I came across a post from, where did I see this post from? It was on my Instagram, and it was from ESPN Bet and I think ESPN NBA. And it had a pretty interesting post. It was a post that was published apparently 13 hours prior. And we want to show you the thumbnail of what the post says. It says, Bronny James is the 6th most bet on player to be the number 1 pick. And I'm like, wow. So when I woke up and I saw that he wasn't even selected at all in the first round, I was like, man, 10 people must have lost tens of millions of dollars betting on him. And then there's also an article that came out by the New York Times that we actually want to get into, and then we're going to get into some of the things that some of the people had to say. But let me get into this New York Times article right now. So the article starts off with the headline, Bronny James goes unselected on night 1 of NBA draft for LeBron on edge. It continues on. Bronny James was unselected on day 1 of the 2024 NBA draft. All 30 picks went by Wednesday night without LeBron's son's name being called, leaving his NBA future up in the air heading into Thursday night's draft festivities. Bronny, 19, going undrafted in round 1 wasn't exactly a shock. He had been pegged as a likely second-round pick throughout the draft process. He underwent 2 individual workouts this summer with the Lakers and the Suns, although he had no opportunities to work out with other teams. And he says, Rich Paul of Clutch Sports, Bronny's agent, said he wouldn't entertain two-way offers, instead requiring an NBA contract. This is nothing new, Paul said per ESPN. The goal is to find him a team that values your guy and try to push him to get there. It's important to understand the context and realize that this has always been a strategy with many of my clients throughout the years, especially those in need of development like Bronny. My stuff is by design. And then continues on. Bronny has one underwhelming season at USC, averaging 4.8 points per game in 25 contests. Bronny's season, though, was impacted by cardiac arrest that he suffered during a preseason practice in July. And then it says a few other things. LeBron was sentimental on the morning of day one on social media as his son hopped to kick off the NBA, his NBA career. Not feeling in the effing world better than being around raising my boys to men. LeBron wrote on Instagram, "Pops over here getting emotional as hell just thinking about y'all journey so far," right? So that's what that had to say. Now I want to read some of the things that people some of the things that people said on that post. One person said, "That's not gambling, that's donating." Another person said, "Whoever placed his bet is crying out for help." Another person said, "Wow, people just throwing away money." Another person said, "Bunch of casuals having access to a betting app should be a crime." Somebody else said, "That's a money laundering option." Another person said, just give me the money at that point, because ain't no effing way." Another person said, "Honestly, I may bet 100K on this not happening. It would almost certainly be tampering if it happened." Another person said, "The man is not getting drafted." Another person said, "This better be a plus 17 million." Another person said, "Bet he going to start in China." So people were having a few things to say there. Now, what are my thoughts on this? What surprises me is the volume of people that thought he was going to get drafted that high. And I think that a lot of that sentiment has to do with what has been said about Bronny in media over the last 2 months now. If you leave it to the guys on television, a lot of people have been promoting Bronny James and saying that, the Lakers can draft him. He could possibly play with LeBron James. He could be a defensive player and all of that. But when you look at the data, meaning you look at his resume, you look at what he did in college, you also look at his stature. I think he's 6'1", 6'2", right? And you look at the type of league that we're in. If you look at, for instance, the team that just won the NBA championship in the Boston Celtics, they have pretty big wings. You have Drew Holiday, you have Jason Tatum, you have White, you have Jaylen Brown. You're going to need a compilation of players like that to go against those guys. So some size and some length, some two-way players. And if you look at Bronny James, he doesn't really fit the bill. Now, if he had a stellar a college career, then that would have definitely helped him, which now brings into question him refusing to work out with all of 2 teams, and those 2 teams being the Phoenix Suns and Los Angeles Lakers. I don't really think that helps him. Now, obviously, Rich Paul, his agent, basically crystallized the strategy and the idea behind it, basically saying that, look, if you're not willing to give our client a contract, then, there's nothing to discuss here. Now, in the case of Bronny, I think that would have helped him because it would have given them more information, more data for them to scrutinize, for them to analyze, and then be able to have more information and make an informed decision. But when you remove that possibility from them and you're essentially making demands, then all of a sudden you find yourself in a tricky situation. Now, here's what's interesting about the entire thing. Bronny James is projected to be the 55th pick. But if you listen to the way he's talked about in media, you would think he would be the number 1 draft pick coming into the draft. And with the way that Rich Paul is positioning him and positioning himself, you would think that he was a top prospect or a top 5 prospect or top 10 prospect in the entire draft. But in reality, he's not. So there's a little bit of delusion is there, and I think that played into people who listen to people on ESPN and all of this stuff, sit up there, twerk it up on TV, knock over drinks all day long, and who rarely have the courage to actually call it down the line. They kind of fed into the hype, and basically what happened was a lot of people lost their money last night. A whole bunch of people. thinking that he was. It wasn't as if they said he was going to be top 5. They thought he was going to be number 1. And as for someone that watched the first one of 18 picks, you can see that they really had some great prospects out there, some really great prospects. So for him to get selected against over all of them, there must be some element of delusion here. One sympathizes. There must be. Now, as you guys know, you wouldn't know this if you follow big media because they're not touching it. They're staying away from it with a 100-yard stick. They don't even want to touch this story. Although I give credit to, The Odd Couple. I heard Chris Broussard talk about it. And, of course, a plethora of independent guys have been talking about it. Based on what I've been hearing, Ticket TV has been all over this story. So a lot of people are talking about this story here. But in the midst of us discussing this yesterday, Ticket TV, I think Tour for Sports as well. But in the midst of us discussing this yesterday, I began to then think about the way the coverage of JJ Redick is being handled by ESPN versus the coverage of Ime Udoka. And all of the things that came with that Ime Udoka story. If you look at the JJ Redick situation, ESPN is not even touching this story. And I have hypothesized that the reason they're not doing it is because JJ Redick was just employed at ESPN as early as the NBA Finals. So if they start talking about JJ Redick, it will reflect poorly on them because this is someone that they've been propping up on their network. Stephen A. Smith, ESPN, First Aid, they've all been propped. Now, I want to just say this quickly because it's something I thought about. And I think I saw it on 78 Sports yesterday. You know, a lot of you jigaboos in the comment section, y'all had all of this excitement. Y'all was up there rubbing your titties and doing all kind of crazy stuff. Y'all already came to conclusions. Y'all were coming up with nicknames and everything about P. Diddy. And he deserved it, right? He absolutely deserved it. Y'all had no problem turning into private investigators, coming to conclusions and all kind of stuff. But when we talk about that JJ Redick stuff, y'all ain't got nothing to say about it. You guys are relishing in seeing Diddy go down. Y'all are taking a great deal of pride in it. I see you people. Sometimes I see posts that his kids made. I think one of his kids made a post on Father's Day. And you had people running up to the kids' post, leaving I'm like, yo, what kind of human beings do we have in society today? Okay, so if his father did that, so therefore you need to go. So what? So because he did those things, it changes the fact that that's not his father. Those kids, that's not their father. So y'all ain't have no issue doing with that. But we talking about JJ Redick, and you guys want to talk about Pump Your. I'm just watching you guys from the corner. I'm just watching you. Anyway, back to this story. If you look at the way the Ime Udoka scandal was covered versus the JJ Redick story, it's startling. It's absolutely startling. The Ime Udoka scandal was the biggest thing on ESPN. As a matter of fact, we want to play a little bit of what Malika Andrews had to say about Ime Udoka when the news first dropped on ESPN, where she went on Stephen A. Smith's show and basically tried to dictate how his show was going to go. Take a listen to Malika Andrews basically lay down the hammer on Stephen A. Smith on his own show. Take a listen to her here.
Stephen A., with all due respect, this is not about pointing the finger. Stop. What became apparent to me in this press conference is that we do not have all of the information here. And it was frustrating to me that the Celtics declined to elaborate or to give more specifics about what exactly the rule breaking was that led us to this point. So that I just want to get that out of the way first. But to answer your question, Molly, I think what stood out to me, I think what stood out to me is that Brad Stevens, he was upset. That's what stood out to me about what he termed rampant Twitter BS is the word that he used, that women were unfairly dragged into this within the Celtics organization. You could see that Brad Stevens was visibly upset about this. And I also found that to be gross and unnecessary, that folks were bringing in the names and the images of women that is just not a fact, that was purely speculation. And so to me, that is what stood out. But the Celtics as an organization could have done more. And short of doing more ahead of this yesterday, they could have owned that responsibility in this press conference. I understand that there were legal parameters that they had to operate within for everybody involved. And I appreciate the fact that they brought in outside counsel and did a thorough organization. And I think that that is something that was clearly necessary in this situation. But the fact that it was able to go on all day, the fact that we are sitting here debating whether somebody else should have been suspended or not, we are not here, Stephen A., to further blame women. That is not why we are here.
So you heard what Malika Andrews had to say, but it didn't stop there. ESPN at the time made it their business that they were going to prosecute Ime Udoka publicly. And on one particular occasion, something interesting happened. It was on NBA Countdown. And the crew at the time was Stephen A. Smith, Mike Breen, Michael Wilbon, and Jalen Rose. And Jalen Rose had the audacity, he had the chutzpah to go up there and say, but we've made Ime Udoka's name public. And we know that it was a consensual affair. So why isn't the other person being made public? Do you know what ensued after that? At the end of the next commercial, Jalen Rose was forced to make a public apology on live television and then said after reviewing the case, so Jalen Rose reviewed the case during a commercial break, and then he wrote up his apology. No, ESPN forced him to do one. For those of you who don't remember Jalen Rose's apology, we want to play it for you now. Take a listen to Jalen Rose's forced apology by ESPN. Take a listen to that there.
To piggyback on Stephen A's point about what Ime did, we know his name. Maybe I'm missing something as it relates to the law, but why we don't know her name? It's not like she's a minor. I feel like we should know her name publicly as well. But with that being said, I respectfully disagree with the legend Michael Wilbon. This is why. I feel like he deserves the opportunity to work again. I'm Jalen Rose, and I would like to apologize for a comment I made earlier on NBA Countdown. I question why a woman's name who had an alleged affair with Celtics head coach Ime Udoka was not made public. After an internal investigation, and it was discovered that she was a subordinate to the head coach, I now understand fully why her name should not be released to the public.
So you heard Jalen Rose. Now I want to get to Stephen A. Smith for a moment here, because Stephen A. Smith produced the show where he was slamming P. Diddy. And I get it. It brings in a lot of engagement and all of that. Stephen A. Smith that talks about people using his name for views doing the exact same thing because he thinks he's above it all. Like, oh, people use me for views, but I don't use other people. Okay, fine. You're not part of the ecosystem. You're the one driving it. Everybody uses you and you don't use anybody else, right? You're talking about P. Diddy for no other reason because you just want to express your sentiments, not because it's also going to get you some engagement. But fine, we'll all play that game together. Stephen A. Smith went on a rant 2 days ago about P. Diddy scrubbing his Instagram account. He removed all of his posts, every single post. Stephen A. Smith then took it upon himself to basically publicly flog P. Diddy for doing that. How dare you do that? You leave the apology video up. And I'm sitting there listening to him like, bro, who sent you? What are you doing? Like, what are you doing right now? What exactly are you doing? Are you the one, like, are you litigating the case? Like, what are you doing? Did they send you out to go do some investigation? Like, what are you doing? But anyway, he did that. Now, here's the fundamental difference between Stephen A. Smith's energy for P. Diddy versus his energy for JJ Redick and these allegations. Some of you may say, well, there's evidence. There are things that are being said. Has the U.S. government brought a case against P. Diddy? Has a case been filed against him? Have they brought up any, has he been charged with anything? I think the answer is no. So we're all sitting here and waiting, like the rest of you watching. But that didn't stop Stephen A. Smith from taking a position on P. Diddy. It didn't stop a lot of you guys from taking a position on P. Diddy. And how you want to feel about him is fine. I disowned him after I saw that video. But we don't hear a mumbling word from nobody at the network, from JJ Redick. We don't hear a mumbling word. Nothing. Nathan. When Malika Andrews mentioned Joe Mazzulla, she's like, oh, it's important to mention that Joe Mazzulla was accused of this and this is domestic violence. There was this to settle. You can't say, well, I heard JJ Redick was accused of using racial slurs against women, using racial slurs against Asian NBA fans in multiple occasions, calling them this. Now, I thought it was just one. They're like three. There's an Asian thing that he did, blunder that he had. Then he had the one with his ex-girlfriend. That situation being accused in his email or whatever. We don't know if that's legitimate or not. And then we had the third one from Halima. I can't remember the lady's name, Halima, who used to work at Duke University back in 2005 or something like that, where he basically called it an N-word. These are three separate occasions. And we don't hear nothing from ESPN, but they want us to take them seriously when an Ime Udoka or Joe Mazzulla has an incident. Who are we kidding here? And then you got all of these in the comment section twerking it up, hollering and screaming. Yo, I don't understand what you're doing, bro. I don't get it. What's going on? Like, why are you coming against the man? Meanwhile, when we heard the stuff about P. Diddy and somebody, y'all were the first ones jumping up and down, hollering in the street. Matter of fact, some of you guys were happy that Ime Udoka got suspended. Y'all were already coming to conclusions. Well, you know, he was a support. He took advantage of his subordinate. How the hell do we know that it was a subordinate when we didn't know the identity of the person in question? But you guys had no problem, none, assuming that he was wrong. It was already ingrained in you. Yeah, wrong. He wrong. But now, when I'm bringing up the Jay, well, how you gonna bring it up for? I mean, come on, man. You hating. So what y'all been doing? You hating on Jay. Let him live. Let him live. And then the next dumbass question y'all been at, why is this coming up all of a sudden? I mean, why is it why I didn't hear it came up all of a sudden for Ime Udoka. It came up all of a sudden for Joe Mazzulla. It came up all of a sudden for Jay. It happens to anyone attaining any leadership position anywhere. They're going to run a background check. If you don't believe me, you go try to run for governor of your state, a mayor of your city, and then find out and ask the dumbass question, oh, why is all of my past all of a sudden? Because people want to know the person that is assuming the position. Duh, welcome to the world. Welcome to Earth, where we've all been. These must be children asking these questions. I don't want to believe these are grown adult men. Like, who are we kidding? So I'm not coming off of it. I'm giving you guys exactly how I feel about it, and I think the coverage is unfair. I don't see it being balanced. I see people picking and choosing.